Rain doesn't fall in Seoul, it attacks. It came down in sheets that night, bending the neon reflections on the Gangnam streets into bleeding streaks of red and gold. On the massive LED screen above the Kang Group tower, a headline scrolled in both Korean and English, bright enough to be seen from 3 blocks away. Chaebol Air given 24-hour marriage ultimatum. Kang Min-yi was running. His Italian suit, which had cost more than most people's monthly rent, was completely soaked through. His tie had been torn loose somewhere between the building's underground parking level and the street. 3 camera drones hummed above him like mechanical wasps, their lenses locked on his face, and behind him, at least a dozen reporters were sprinting in heels and loafers, screaming questions he had no intention of answering. Min-yi SSI, is it true you rejected the arranged marriage? Mr. Kang, who is she, the woman your father chose? Will you step down from the board? He didn't stop. He cut left through a narrow alley between a Pajangmatcha and a convenience store, vaulted a scooter blocking the path, and emerged on the other side into Itaewon's slower, quieter streets. The reporters lost him at the turn. The drones didn't, but he no longer cared about the drones. He had bigger problems. His phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He yanked it out without slowing down, already knowing what he would see. The timer on the screen read 23, 12, 44, counting down with the quiet efficiency of something that intended to ruin his life. Below it, 17 missed calls from his father's personal secretary, 4 from his lawyer, and 1 from a number he didn't recognize. He ignored all of them. He stopped outside a small art gallery tucked between a wine bar and a tailor shop on a side street most people never bothered walking down. The sign above the door read Amara Gallery in clean white letters. Through the glass, warm amber light was still glowing, and a woman was moving slowly through the space, turning off spotlights one by one. She hadn't noticed him yet. Min-yi stood there for exactly 3 seconds, breathing hard, rain dripping from his jaw. Then he raised his fist and pounded on the glass. She turned. Amara Johnson was not the kind of woman who startled easily. That much was obvious from the way she looked at him, not with fear, not with excitement, just with the patient, slightly bemused expression of someone who had seen strange things before and expected to see more. She was tall, composed, wearing a rust-colored blouse tucked into wide-leg trousers, her locks pinned up loosely. She studied him through the glass for a long moment. Then she walked to the door and opened it 2 inches. "We're closed," she said. "I know," he was still catching his breath. "Amara, I need to talk to you." Kang Min-yi. She said his name the way people say a word they've practiced not reacting to. "It's 11:30 at night." "I have 23 hours. He held up his phone so she could see the timer. "Marry me." She stared at him. A beat passed. Then she laughed once, a short, disbelieving sound, and shook her head slowly. "You must be insane." She moved to close the door. He pressed his palm flat against the glass. "Please." That word stopped her, not because it was dramatic, but because Kang Min-yi, the man whose face appeared on Forbes Korea, whose posture in every photograph suggested he had never once asked anyone for anything, said it like it physically cost him something. She opened the door wider, not all the way, just enough to let him talk. "You have 5 minutes," she said, "and you're dripping on my floor." 24 hours earlier, Kang Min-yi had been sitting at the head of a 30-person boardroom table in the Kang Group headquarters on the 48th floor of the tallest building in the Gangnam Financial District. The city had stretched out behind him like something he owned, which, technically, a significant portion of it he did, or was about to. That had been the understanding his entire life. His father, Chairman Kang D-hyun, had walked in at exactly 9 in the morning, flanked by 2 senior board members and his personal attorney. The old man moved with the deliberateness of someone who had spent 60 years making sure every entrance he made counted. He sat at the opposite end of the table, folded his hands, and looked at his son the way you look at an investment you're reconsidering. "The board has made a decision," his father said without preamble. Minyi already didn't like how this was starting. Public confidence in the succession has been declining for 8 months, the attorney continued, opening a leather folder. 3 major institutional investors have signaled concern about leadership stability. The family's philanthropic image has taken hits from last year's press cycle. The board believes a marriage announcement would consolidate that image and signal long-term commitment. A marriage, Minyi said flatly. A specific marriage. His father slid a document across the table. Han Soo-yeon. Her family owns 40% of the secondary textile contracts feeding into Kang Manufacturing. She is educated, media-trained, and has already agreed. Minyi looked at the document. Han Soo-yeon's photograph was paper-clipped to the top. She was beautiful in the way corporate portraits always tried to be, professional, symmetrical, telling you nothing. You already spoke to her family. We reached an agreement 2 weeks ago. The silence in the room was the kind that presses on your eardrums. And if I refuse, Minyi asked. His father didn't blink. You are removed from the board of directors. Your shares are frozen pending restructuring review. Your access to company accounts, properties, and executive infrastructure is revoked within 48 hours. And we announced to the press that you chose to step away from the family for personal reasons. A public disowning dressed in polite language. A consequence dressed in reality. His father finally leaned forward. You have until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Minyi. Either you walk into that boardroom with a bride, or you walk out of this family forever. I have spent 30 years building something that will outlast both of us. I will not let your resistance to structure be the thing that fractures it. Minyi stood slowly. Every eye in the room was on him. He straightened his jacket, picked up his phone, and walked to the door. Before he stepped through it, he turned back once. You built something, father, he said quietly, but you never once asked me if I wanted to be part of it. He walked out. The timer started. He spent the first 3 hours doing what any rational person would do, calling his lawyer, speaking to 2 financial advisors, and seriously considering whether accepting Han Soo-yeon was the only logical move. His lawyer was careful and precise. The terms were airtight. His father had structured the succession documents years ago in a way that made this moment legally bulletproof. There was no loophole. There was no workaround. Either he married by 9 the next morning, or everything he had worked the last decade building inside the company, the sustainability division, the international expansion into Southeast Asia, the youth employment programs he'd personally funded, all of it would be handed to a board that didn't care about any of it. He sat in his penthouse apartment and stared at the city for a long time. Then he opened the one folder on his phone he hadn't opened in over a year. Inside it was a single photograph, taken without his knowledge, posted briefly by a hospital staff member who had since deleted it. It showed a woman sitting in a donation chair in the emergency ward of Samsung Medical Center, her sleeve rolled up, a needle in her arm, looking out the window while her blood moved through a tube. She hadn't known anyone photographed her. She hadn't stayed for the thank you. By the time Minyi had been stabilized after the car accident and asked who had donated, the ward nurse had only a first name and the description that she'd slipped out before anyone could speak to her. It had taken him 4 months to find Amara Johnson. And then he had found her, introduced himself properly at a gallery event she'd curated, and watched her look at him with the exact same composed disinterest. She'd turned on him tonight through the glass door, and she'd said something he'd never forgotten. I don't want to be someone's charity case, Mr. Kang. Please don't make my decision about me a transaction about you. He had respected that. He had stayed away. But he had never stopped thinking about the kind of person who saved a stranger's life and left before the credit arrived. That was the person he needed right now, not someone who wanted the money, not someone who wanted the title. Someone who would look his father in the eye without flinching. He was on his feet and moving toward the door before he'd fully decided to go. Inside the gallery, Amara sat across from him with her arms folded and her expression calibrated to neutral. She had given him a towel not out of warmth, she was clear, but because he was still dripping, and pointed him to a chair beside a sculpture that appeared to be made entirely of repurposed electrical wire shaped into a woman mid-stride. He told her everything: the boardroom, the timer, the ultimatum, Han Soo-yeon. When he finished, the room was quiet except for the rain outside. "You want me to pretend to be your wife," Amara said. "Not pretend. A legal marriage, a real one on paper, but I'm not asking for love, Amara. I'm asking for a contract between two adults, 3 months of public-facing appearances. I walk into that boardroom with you beside me, my father backs down, I retain control, and then we dissolve it quietly. You'll be compensated." "Stop," she held up one hand. "Stop talking about compensation." He stopped. "You came here at midnight," she said slowly, "in the rain to ask me, a woman you barely know, to legally marry you before 9 in the morning because your billionaire father gave you a deadline." She tilted her head. "And your plan was to open with 'you'll be compensated.'" I was going to build up to it. "Kang Min-yi." She said his name again, different this time, not practiced, tired. "I'm an Afro-American woman running a gallery in Itaewon. Do you understand what it would mean for me to walk into a chaebol family, the press attention, the way people would talk about me, about why I'm there?" She shook her head. "I have spent 4 years in this country building something quiet and mine. I know exactly how Seoul talks about women who look like me standing next to men who look like you. I'm not a diversity statement." "I know that." "Do you?" "Yes." He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and for the first time that night he looked less like a man performing urgency and more like a man who was genuinely exhausted. "That's why I came to you and not someone easier, because I don't need someone who will fold under pressure. I need someone who's already been under pressure and didn't fold." Amara was quiet for a moment. "You're not asking me to be your wife," she said finally. "You're asking me to be your armor." He didn't deny it. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the wet street below. A couple hurried past under a shared umbrella. Somewhere down the block, a street vendor was still open, the orange glow of his cart reflecting in the puddles. "My answer is no," she said. Min-yi stood. He picked up the towel, folded it neatly out of what seemed like reflex, and placed it on the chair. "Okay," he said. He walked to the door. His hand was on the handle when she spoke again. "Why me really? The real reason." He paused, his back was still to her. "Because you saved my life and didn't stay for the applause," he said. "And every person in that boardroom tomorrow is only there for the applause." He pushed the door open and walked back into the rain. She told herself she wasn't going to think about it. She locked the gallery, took the subway home to her apartment in Mapo, made tea she didn't drink, and sat on her floor surrounded by the sketches she'd been preparing for next month's exhibition. She was not going to think about Kang Min-yi standing in the rain with a countdown timer on his phone and desperation in his eyes that he was clearly too proud to name properly. She absolutely thought about it. By 2 in the morning she was on her laptop, and what she found made her set down her cup slowly. The news cycle had already exploded. Someone had photographed Min-yi outside her gallery, a drone shot, grainy but identifiable, and the caption read, "Kang Air spotted begging outside Itaewon Gallery. Mystery woman inside." Social media had split into 2 violent camps within the hour. One side was using phrases like refreshing and breaking tradition and flooding the tags with support. The other side was uglier, angrier, and far louder, using words Amara had learned to expect and had never fully gotten used to. The stock ticker for Kang Group affiliates was already showing a 0.5% dip in after-hours trading. She closed the laptop. Then she opened it again and searched her father's name. David Johnson. He had come to Korea in the late 90s as a logistics consultant, met her mother, stayed. Built a small import-export operation that had eventually landed him a contract with a mid-tier manufacturing company called Sehan Industries. A company that, she now stared at the screen to confirm, had been acquired by Kang Group in 2009. Her father had died in 2011. Heart failure, the doctors had said. She had always wondered if stress had something to do with it. She sat with that for a long time. By morning, Amara hadn't slept. She arrived at the gallery early, and before she could unlock the door, a black sedan pulled to the curb. The man who stepped out was not Minyi. He was older, silver-haired, wearing a dark suit with the quiet authority of someone who had never once rushed anywhere. Chairman Kang Di-hyun. Amara turned to face him. "Ms. Johnson," he said in precise, formal English, "may we speak?" "You came to my gallery at 7 in the morning," she said, "so I assume you're going to speak whether I agree or not." Something shifted in the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "My son came to you last night," he said. "He did. And you refused him." "I did." "Good." He folded his hands behind his back. "Ms. Johnson, my son is talented, stubborn, and deeply sentimental, 3 qualities that make an excellent son and a dangerous heir. The board does not want sentiment. They want performance. Han Soo-yeon understands the role. The merger her family represents would add stability that Min Yi's more idealistic programs cannot." Amara looked at him steadily. "Then why are you here?" "Because I want you to stay away from my son," he said simply. "I want to be certain there are no further, impulsive decisions on his part. I know he finds you significant. I want to ensure that significance ends here." "Mr. Kang," Amara's voice was even, "did you acquire a company called Sihin Industries in 2009? The pause was small, but it was there. "That acquisition was part of a larger portfolio restructuring," he said carefully. "My father had a contract with Sihin Industries," she said. "He lost it after the acquisition. He spent 2 years trying to rebuild. He died 2 years after that." Chairman Kang held her gaze. "I was not aware of your connection." "Were you not?" she said. The sedan idled behind him. A full 10 seconds passed. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said finally. It came out sounding like he meant it, which was somehow more unsettling than if it hadn't. He returned to the sedan. It pulled away smoothly, leaving Amara on the sidewalk in the early morning gray, her keys still in her hand, the timer she hadn't agreed to suddenly feeling very loud in her chest. At 8:15 her phone rang. "Minyi." She almost didn't answer. "I know you said no," he said before she could speak. "I'm not calling to change your mind. I just wanted you to know that my father probably visited you this morning." She blinked. "How did you know?" "Because he visits everyone who might complicate his plans. It's his version of damage control." A pause. "Whatever he said to you, I want you to know I didn't send him." "I know you didn't." Silence. "He told you something that upset you," Minyi said quietly. "I can hear it." Amara stood in the center of her gallery, surrounded by art her father had never seen, and a story she was only beginning to understand. "Your father's company had a contract with mine," she said, "before he died." The silence on the other end changed quality. "I didn't know that," Minyi said. "No," she said, "I don't think you did." She hung up and stood very still. Outside, Seoul was waking up. The timer on Minyi's phone, somewhere across the city, was reading something under an hour. She could feel it like a second pulse. She had 6 hours to decide if the enemy was the man in the rain or the man in the sedan. And she was beginning to think she'd been looking at it wrong the entire time. At noon, Han Soo-yeon found Minyi in the lobby of Kang Group headquarters. She was impeccably dressed, as she always was, ivory blazer, hair sleek, the kind of composure that came from a lifetime of being prepared for public moments. She had known about the gallery. She had seen the drone footage, and she had spent the morning making the kinds of quiet, precise moves that people underestimated because she made them look effortless. She walked up to Minyi in full view of the lobby staff, the security desk, and 3 journalists who had been staking out the building since 6 in the morning. She said his name once, and then she slapped him. It wasn't theatrical. It was controlled. One sharp, deliberate strike that landed before he could process it was coming. The lobby went silent. "You embarrassed me," she said, voice low but entirely clear. "You embarrassed my family, and you ran to some foreign woman in Itaewon and put it on the internet." Minyi touched his jaw. He didn't raise his voice. "Soo-yeon, don't." Her composure cracked for exactly 1 second, and beneath it was something real, not love, but genuine injury, the kind that comes from being told you weren't enough of a reason. "I never asked to be chosen for you, but I agreed, and you treated it like a burden." She straightened her blazer. "I hope she's worth it." She walked to the elevator and didn't look back. One of the journalists had gotten it on camera. By 1 in the afternoon, the video had 400,000 views. The headline read, "Han Soo-yeon strikes back. Chaebol drama escalates as rejected bride confronts heir." Kang Group shares dropped another full percent. Amara saw the video like everyone else on her phone, between appointments, while a client talked to her about wall lighting. She watched it twice. There was something about Han Soo-yeon's face in that one fractured second, that flash of real hurt before the mask came back, that stayed with her in a way she hadn't expected. She called Minyi back. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I've been slapped before." "That's not an answer." He exhaled. "I'm fine. The press is not fine. My father is not fine. The board is meeting at 4 to discuss whether the situation has become unrecoverable." "Has it?" "Only if I walk in there alone." She was quiet. "I spent the morning reading about Sehan Industries," she said. "The acquisition, the restructuring, the contractors who were let go." She paused. "My father wasn't betrayed by your family, Minyi. I found his letters. He signed a voluntary exit. He said he wanted out before the Kang money changed what he'd built." "Amara." "But he also wrote something else," she continued. "He said someone at Kang Group personally ensured his outstanding debts were cleared after he stepped away, anonymously, so he could start clean." She let that sit for a moment. "I think I know who." Minyi said nothing. "Your father came to see me this morning," she said. "He told me to stay away from you. He was cold and precise and everything you'd expect." She hesitated. "But he also said he was sorry for my loss. And the way he said it, Minyi, I've been lied to by people who were good at it. That wasn't the way a man lies." "You think he knew who you were before last night?" "I think he's known exactly who I am for a long time." The line was quiet for a moment. "He set this up," Minyi said, and his voice carried the flat, hollow quality of someone watching a chess board resolve into a pattern they should have seen 10 moves earlier. "The ultimatum, the timeline, sending me out without options. He knew I would come to you." "Did he know you would go to me specifically?" "He knew everything about how I think." Minyi almost laughed, but it didn't have any humor in it. "He built me. Of course he knew." Amara walked to the back of her gallery and sat on the stool she kept near the storage room door. Her father's letters were on the desk in front of her. Printed copies she'd driven to a storage facility in Mapo to retrieve at 7 in the morning, too restless to stay home. "He told me my father asked him to protect me from this world," she said slowly. "Just before he left, those exact words." "What does that mean?" "I don't know yet." She picked up one of the letters. Her father's handwriting was careful and slightly slanted. He had always written as if he was trying to make sure the words stayed still. "But I think I need to stop asking whether this is a trap and start asking whether it's an invitation." "Those are different things," Minyi said. "I know." She set the letter down. "How much time is left?" He checked. 4 hours and 40 minutes. "Where do you need to be at 9? "Boardroom, 48th floor." "I'll be there at 8:50, she said. Silence. "Amara." "Don't thank me," she said. "I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this because my father walked away from something, and I think I've spent 10 years doing the same thing, and I'm tired of walking away." She hung up. The next 4 hours moved in layers. Minyi returned to the tower and spent them in a glass-walled conference room on the 32nd floor with his lawyer. drawing up a framework that was clean and fair, terms that gave Amara full exit rights at any point without penalty, financial security that had nothing to do with performance, and absolute legal protection from any board attempts to tie her to Kang Group obligations. He stared at the documents for a long time after the lawyer left. He thought about Han Soo-yeon's face in the lobby, the one real second of it. He thought about his father's hands folded on the boardroom table 24 hours ago like a man playing a game he'd already won. He thought about Amara in the gallery, surrounded by other people's art, building something quiet and hers. He thought about the fact that somewhere in all of this, something had shifted, and it was harder now to pretend it was entirely transactional. At 7, his phone buzzed, a message from a number he recognized as one of his father's aides. The board has been informed a decision is forthcoming. Chairman requests confirmation by 8:45. Minyi typed back, confirmed. He put the phone face down and looked at the city. Amara spent the late afternoon in her storage unit. It was a small climate-controlled space in a facility near the Han River, full of crates her father had packed himself, paintings, fabrics, notebooks, the small material residue of a life built far from home. She had been in it only twice since his death. Both times had broken something in her that took months to reassemble, so she had stopped going. She went now. She found the letters she remembered, the Sihin correspondence, the exit documents, the carefully worded goodbyes to business partners. But she also found something she hadn't known existed, a sealed envelope addressed to her, in her father's handwriting with a date 7 years ago, a year before he died. She sat on a wooden crate in the fluorescent light and opened it. Her father had written 3 pages. She read them slowly, twice. By the end, her hands were steady, but her chest felt like a building with the structural supports quietly removed. He had known he was sick before anyone else did. He had not told her because he hadn't wanted her grief to shape her choices. He had walked away from Sihin because he wanted his exit to be clean, no one's charity, no one's burden. He had asked one person to quietly watch over her from a distance. Chairman Kang Di-hyun. He is a man who understands what it costs to build something her father had written and what it costs to protect it. I did not always agree with his methods, but I trusted him with the only thing that mattered. Amara folded the letter carefully and placed it in her bag. She stood. She checked the time. She had 70 minutes. If you're feeling the pull of this story, you know what to do. Hit like. Drop a comment with your prediction about what Chairman Kang really planned all along, and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. The final act is where everything breaks open. She arrived at the Kang Group Tower at 8:47. The lobby was not what she had expected. She had anticipated tension, a cold reception, perhaps security with clipboards and skeptical eyes. Instead, the lobby was nearly empty, just a single attendant at the desk who looked up when she walked through the sliding glass doors and said quietly, "Ms. Johnson, 48th floor, they're waiting." The elevator ride took 45 seconds. Amara counted them. She looked at herself in the polished steel of the elevator doors. Rust blouse, the same one she'd worn in the gallery. She had not gone home to change. She had not curated this moment. She had come as herself, which was, she had decided somewhere between the storage unit and the lobby, the only version of herself worth bringing. The doors opened. The boardroom corridor was glass-walled and lit in the blue-white light that expensive offices use to imply neutrality. Through the glass, she could see the long table, the board members, the silence of a room full of powerful people waiting for a verdict. Chairman Kang sat at the far end, very still, his face unreadable. Minyi was standing at the door. He turned when he heard the elevator, and something in his expression, carefully controlled, professionally blank, came undone at the edges when he saw her. Not relief. Exactly, something more like recognition. "You came," he said. "I said I would." He looked at her for a moment. "You didn't change." "I know." She looked past him at the boardroom. "Should I have?" No, he said. No, you shouldn't have. She reached into her bag and held out a folded piece of paper. My father's letter. I want you to read it after tonight. Not now, after. He took it without looking at it and tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to the center. Are you ready? He asked. Are you? No, he said, with the first completely unguarded answer she'd heard from him. But that hasn't stopped anything yet. She nodded. He opened the door. The room did not erupt. Powerful rooms rarely do. What happened instead was a collective, almost physical reorientation. 30 people recalibrating their understanding of the situation in real time as Amara walked in beside Minyi and took the empty seat to his left. Chairman Kang looked at her from the other end of the table. She looked back. The board attorney cleared his throat. The deadline was 9 o'clock. It is currently 8:53. Mr. Kang, you are presenting. Amara Johnson, Minyi said clearly. My intended. Another of those silences that press on the ears. One board member, older, with the expression of a man who had spent decades being the least flexible person in any room, leaned forward. This is irregular. The arrangement agreed upon was. The arrangement, Chairman Kang said quietly from the far end of the table, was that my son present himself with a spouse before 9 o'clock. He paused. He has done so. Murmurs, the board member who had spoken opened his mouth again. Chairman, the terms of the Suyon agreement are a separate matter. Chairman Kang's voice did not rise. It never needed to. One that will be handled with the Han family privately and with full respect. He looked at his son, then at Amara. The succession question is answered. The attorney shuffled papers. Someone near the center of the table whispered to their neighbor. The board member who had objected sat back with the stiff posture of a man who would be making calls from the parking garage in 20 minutes. The clock on the wall read 8:56. Chairman Kang stood, meeting adjourned. And that was how it ended. Not with a dramatic vote, not with a shouting match, but with an old man standing up in a quiet room and deciding that the thing he had arranged to happen had happened. They were in the elevator again, going down, before either of them spoke. That's it, Amara said. For tonight. He knew, she said. It wasn't a question. He knew. She looked straight ahead. He set the whole thing up. The timeline, the pressure, the way he structured it so you'd have to come to me specifically. Yes. Why? Minyi was quiet for a moment. My father has spent 30 years building a company. The last 5 years I think he's been trying to build something else. He glanced at her. He never knew how to say sorry to my mother, never knew how to sit still long enough to say it to me, but he knew how to move pieces. He paused. Your father asked him to protect you. I think this was his version of honoring that. By trapping me into a marriage. By putting you in the room, he said. What you did with the room was yours. She considered that. The elevator opened onto the lobby. The attendant was gone. The building was nearly empty. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the street was that particular clean brightness that Seoul wore after a storm, every surface reflective, every light doubled. What happens now? She asked. Now we file the paperwork, he said, and then we figure out what we actually are. She looked at him. You know this isn't how this works. You can't just. I know. He turned to face her. I know I came to you at midnight with a timer and a crisis and called it a business arrangement. I know the circumstances were absurd and manipulated and not remotely fair to you. He didn't look away. But I also know that every conversation I've had with you has been the most honest I've been with anyone in years. And I'd rather spend 3 months being honest with you in a complicated situation than spend the rest of my life being comfortable with someone I'll never say anything real to. Amara studied him for a long time. That, she said finally, is the first thing you've said to me that sounds like something worth responding to. Is that a yes? It's a, I'll think about it on the walk to the subway. He almost smiled. It was a real one, different from every expression she'd cataloged on his face in the last 24 hours. Smaller, less constructed. "Can I walk with you?" he asked. "You can try," she said, and pushed through the glass doors. In the parking garage beneath the tower, Han Soo-yeon sat in the back of a car she hadn't summoned yet. Her phone was in her hand. On the screen, she had an unsent message to a contact listed only as Director H. She read it over once. It went exactly as expected, proceeding to Phase 2. She pressed send. The screen went dark. She looked out at the concrete wall of the garage and thought about the slap in the lobby. The way it had felt deliberate, not because she was angry, but because she had needed Min-yi to believe she was devastated. She thought about the performance of the last 24 hours, the immaculate grief, the public confrontation timed for maximum visibility. She thought about what Phase 2 actually meant. And she thought about Amara Johnson, who had walked into that boardroom in the same clothes she'd worn all day, who hadn't dressed the part, who hadn't performed anything, who had simply walked in and stood there, taking up exactly the space she was owed. For the first time all night, Han Soo-yeon felt something that might have been respect. She pressed the button to call her driver. Whatever Phase 2 was, Amara Johnson was not going to be easy. And easy, Soo-yeon had always known, was boring. Outside, Min-yi was walking beside Amara through the wet streets of Gangnam toward the subway. The city was rebuilding itself around them. Vendors reopening, couples emerging from doorways, the ordinary rhythm of Seoul reasserting itself after the rain. "Your father's letter," Amara said. "You'll read it tonight." "Tonight," he confirmed. He wrote that he trusted one person with the only thing that mattered. She glanced at him. "I think he meant me, but I also think he meant the version of me I haven't let myself be in a long time." "What version is that?" She thought about it, the one who walks into rooms. They walked in silence for half a block. "Your gallery," he said. "The name, you named it after yourself." "I did." "That's not small." "No," she agreed, "it isn't." The subway entrance appeared ahead, the green sign catching the wet light. She slowed but didn't stop yet. 3 months, she said. "That was your original offer." "It was." "I want one condition." "Name it." "No performance," she said. "If I'm in that family, I'm in it as myself. Not a statement, not an image, not your armor." She looked at him directly. "If that's what your father wanted, he gets it. If the board doesn't like it, that's information. But I won't play a role." Min-yi held her gaze. "That's the only way I'd want it." She nodded slowly. "Then I'll see you tomorrow," she said. "At a reasonable hour with coffee and actual documents." "I'll arrange it." "I'll arrange it," she corrected. "My terms, remember." She started down the subway stairs. Halfway down, she paused and turned back. "Min-yi." He looked down at her. "Your father," she said. "Whatever he did and didn't do, I think he loved you the only way he knew how." She paused. "Read the letter before you go to sleep." She descended into the light of the station below. He stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, hands in the pockets of his still damp jacket. The timer on his phone finally stopped. The city moved around him without caring what had just happened or changed or begun. He pulled out the letter, held it. Put it back without reading it yet, because some things needed exactly the right moment. And then Kang Min-yi walked back into Seoul, into a story that was only now properly beginning. If you made it this far, you already know this story has more. Like this video, subscribe so you're here when the next chapter drops, and leave a comment. Do you think Chairman Kang is the villain, the architect, or something else entirely? The answer might surprise you. See you in the next one.